What happens 80% of the time in week 1 of NFL football? Well, you're about to find out. Let's talk about Thursday night football, week 1. We've got the Ravens at Chiefs, September 5th, 5:20 Pacific Daylight Time. It's an AFC Championship rematch, Mahomes versus Jackson, Reed versus Harbaugh. Kansas City favored by 3, over-under of 46.5. Kansas City offense was 15th in the league last season, 21.7 points per game, versus a Baltimore defense that was first in the league, 16.5 points per game. This Baltimore offense was really good too, 4th in the league, 28.4 points per game, versus a Kansas City defense that was 2nd in the league, only to Baltimore allowing 17.3 points per game. And I've got 3 big questions. Number 1, will Baltimore remember to run the football now that they have Derrick Henry, probably the greatest pure power running back of the last 20 years. Number 2, how will this Kansas City offense look with its new receiving core? Can it even function without MVP candidate Kadarius Toney? And will Rashee Rice somehow commit a felony on the way to the game or maybe even during the game? Question number 3, does week 1 even matter? Well, yes it does, and here's your answer to the opening question. 46 out of 58 Super Bowl winning teams, that's 80%, have been victorious in week 1 of the season they hoisted the Lombardi Trophy. However, not this year. I've got Baltimore in this one because the Chiefs win big games, the Ravens lose big games, and this is not a big game, which means we should see Lamar Jackson and company tear it up. On to Friday night football for the first time in a really long time. We've got Green Bay at Philly, but actually in Brazil. Friday, September 6th, 5:15 Pacific Daylight Time. These Eagles are favored, minus 2.5. The total is 48.5, and this is a Peacock exclusive. The NFL cash grab and milking of fans continues. Interesting side note, this game is only legally being broadcast on a Friday because there is no high school or college football game within 75 miles or so since, well, it's Brazil. There's probably a high school football game going on somewhere, but thanks to an obscure law from back in the 1950s, we get a Friday night NFL game. This Eagles offense was 7th, 25.5 points per game. Packers defense was 10th last year, 20.6 points per game allowed. Packers offense was 12th, 22.5 points per game, and an Eagles defense that was all the way down at 30th. 25.2 points per game allowed. The Packers and the Eagles were polar opposites last season, with Philly starting off strong and dominant and then ending the season in an epic dumpster fire of a collapse. Green Bay started off mediocre but ended the year hot, with Jordan Love becoming a top-tier quarterback in the second half of the season, cashing in on $220 million in the offseason, tied for highest paid in NFL history. 3 big questions for this matchup. Number 1, what will the Eagles offense look like this year with Saquon but without Jason Kelce? Will they even be able to execute the brotherly shove? Number 2, was the epic collapse last season the new normal, and is that the real Eagles going forward? Number 3, was Jordan Love worth the money, and can this young Packers team improve even more? My guess is the Pack plays as well in South America as they did in North Texas, and they get the win here. Steelers at Atlanta. Sunday, September 8th, 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We've got Atlanta favored by 3 with an over-under of 42.5. Falcons offense was 26th, pretty bad last year at 18.9 points per game, but they've got Kirk Cousins now, and they're taking on a Steelers defense that was dominant, 6th in the league, 19.1 points per game allowed. The Steelers offense was similarly putrid last year under Kenny Pickett, 28th in the league, 17.9 points per game, versus this Falcons defense that was 18th, 21.9 points per game allowed. This is a battle of off-season veteran quarterback additions, Russell Wilson versus Kirk Cousins, with Wilson making around $1 million this year, at least from the Steelers, and another $40 million from Denver. That's nice work if you can get it. Cousins making around $60 million this year, and it's also an Arthur Smith revenge game. Former Atlanta Falcons head coach, now Steelers offensive coordinator. 3 big questions here. Number 1, is Cousins 100%, and how good does this Falcons offense have to be in order to contend? Is Russell Wilson washed? That's question number 2. I'm going to go ahead and answer that. No, he's not. And question number 3, will Arthur Smith get his revenge? Well, I think so. I'm going with the Steelers here because Mike Tomlin's week 1 record as Pittsburgh head coach is 10-6-1 for a winning percentage of .617, while rookie head coaches in the NFL week 1 at home over a span of 20 years have gone a combined 19-26. Not very good. That's a .422. And while Atlanta's offense will be significantly better than last year, Pittsburgh defense will be better as well, and they didn't need to improve. All Pittsburgh's troubles were on the offensive side of the ball last season. Arthur Smith is going to dial up some special magic to exploit the Falcons' D and get his revenge, simultaneously saving his own career and Russell Wilson's. I also wouldn't be surprised to see a rushing touchdown by Justin Fields lined up in a Wildcat formation or some other nonsense. Steelers are going to win this one, and it won't even be close. Moving on to the Arizona Cardinals at Buffalo Bills. Bills are favored by a lot, -6, over-under of 48. This Bills offense was great last year, 6th in the league, 26.5 points per game, versus an Arizona Cardinals defense that was absolutely horrible, 31st in the league, 26.8 points per game allowed. Arizona offense, without Kyler Murray most of the time last year, 24th in the league, 19.4 points per game, versus a Buffalo defense that was stout, 4th in the league, only allowing 18.3 points per game. My three big questions for this matchup are, number one, what does the Bills offense look like without Stephon Diggs? What does this Arizona offense do with a healthy Kyler Murray and the addition of Marvin Harrison Jr.? And number three, is McDermott on the hot seat this year? I could see this one being closer than expected, but I've got the Bills here, nothing to see. Next up, we've got Tennessee Titans at Chicago Bears. The Bears are favored by 4.5, the over-under at 45.5. This Bears offense last year, and yeah, we know it's going to be a lot different this year, but last year they were 18th in the league with Justin Fields, 21.2 points per game, versus this Titans defense that was middle of the pack, 16th, 21.6 points per game allowed. Tennessee offense last year was pretty bad, 27th in the league, 17.9 points per game scored, versus a Chicago defense that was 20th, allowing 22.3 points per game. My three big questions for this matchup are, number one, how fast will this newly rebuilt Bears offense click and how good will they be? Number two, how will the Titans fare this season after losing their best player and their head coach? Number three, wouldn't last year's Bears have beaten this Titans squad? I've got a feeling all eyes are going to be on this game for the debut of Caleb Williams, and I wonder what the reaction will be with either outcome. But I've got the Bears here. Next up, we've got the New England Patriots visiting the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Bengals are the heaviest favorite of the week, -8.5, with an over-under of 40.5. This Bengals offense, without Joe Burrow last season, was 16th in the league, 21.5 points per game. This Patriots defense was 15th, middle of the pack, 21.5 points per game allowed. New England's offense was historically bad last year, 32nd, dead last in the league, 13.9 points per game. I honestly don't see it getting a lot better this season. They're up against a Cincinnati defense that was 21st in the league. Daddy. This Cincinnati defense was 21st in the league, 22.6 points per game allowed, and this Bengals team gets Joe Burrow back. The Patriots have a reunion with Jacoby Brissett. One of these teams is getting a better deal than the other. New head coach Gerard Mayo makes his debut. It's against a Super Bowl contender on the road. Good luck. The Pats are the biggest underdogs of Week 1. My three big questions are, number one, how much will this culture shift in New England under Mayo even matter this season? Number two, can Joe Burrow stay healthy for an entire season with the Bengals? And number three, have the Patriots hit rock bottom yet, or can they fall even further? As for my pick, I will take the good football team with the elite quarterback here over the not-so-good team with the brand-new head coach. The Bengals are going to win this one easily. Next up, we've got the Texans visiting Indy, and Houston is one of the only road favorites this week. -2.5, over-under of 48.5. This Texans offense was really good last year. 13th, 22.2 points per game versus a Colts defense that was 28th, allowing 24.4 points per game. Indy's offense wasn't half bad either, 11th in the league, 23.3 points per game, versus a Houston defense that was also 11th, allowing 20.8 points per game. These teams start the season with a rematch of a game that ended the regular season last year and was actually a de facto playoff game. Loads of young talent on both of these squads. My three big questions are, number one, are the Colts ready to contend if they stay healthy? I'll answer that one and say yes. Number two, how explosive will this Texans offense be with the addition of Stephon Diggs? Number three, is the outcome of this game going to matter for the division and for the playoffs? I'll go ahead and answer that one too, yes. As I said earlier, the Texans are one of only two road favorites in Week 1, and for good reason. This game is projected to be the third highest scoring game of the week, and it could easily be a shootout. This is the game I'm probably most excited to watch, and it could go either way. but I just can't pick Indy over Houston at this point. I've got the Texans here, and it should be a great one. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars visiting the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins are favored by 3 at home here in a game that's projected to go 49.5 points. This Miami offense was smoking hot last year, at least when the weather was hot. Second in the league, 29.2 points per game, versus a Jaguars defense that was 17th in the league, allowing 21.8. This Jacksonville offense was middle of the pack, 14th, 22.2 points per game, versus a Dolphins defense that was underwhelming at 22nd, allowing 23 points per game. This is the second highest projected point total of the week, with only a 3-point spread. This game has the makings of a shootout written all over it, and we may get to see these quarterbacks really sling it. 3 big questions. Number 1, is Jacksonville okay? What was going on at the end of last season? Number 2, how much will this Dolphins defense regress, if at all, after losing some key players and a defensive coordinator? Number 3, will Tyreek Hill get a chance to break the receiving yards record? This should be an awesome game, but I'm going to take the Dolphins at home. Carolina Panthers visiting the New Orleans Saints, with the Saints favored by 4 at home. 41.5 is your point total. This New Orleans offense was top 10, 9th in the league, 23.6 points per game scored, versus a Panthers defense that was absolutely horrible, 29th in the league, 24.5 points allowed per game. Carolina offense was somehow even worse than their defense, 32nd, bottom of the barrel, and tied with the Patriots, 13.9 points per game scored, versus a Saints defense that was also top 10, 8th in the league, 19.2 points per game allowed. This is another Week 1 divisional game, another rookie head coach making their debut on the road. The Panthers were arguably the worst team in football last year, and the Saints were top 10 in offense and defensive scoring, yet still managed to underachieve in the NFL's weakest division, the NFC South. The fact that New Orleans is only favored by 4 in this extremely favorable home matchup probably says more about the odds makers' lack of confidence in Dennis Allen, Derek Carr, and the Saints than it does about how much improvement we can reasonably expect from the Panthers this year. My 3 big questions. Can Bryce Young make the mythical sophomore season leap, or is he a draft bust, destined to be an AFC North or NFC West backup QB? Number 2, is Dennis Allen on the hot seat in New Orleans? I'm going to go ahead and answer that and say yes. Number 3, is Derek Carr washed up? I'm not going to answer that one. You guys get to me in the comments on that. I'm taking the Saints here because I can't even entertain the idea of picking the Panthers, but we'll see. Next up, we've got the Minnesota Vikings at the New York Giants. Minnesota is the other of the 2 road favorites in Week 1. This has much more to do with the Giants than it does the Vikings, though, I'm afraid. Minnesota is favored by 1 in this matchup that features a 41.5 projected total. The Vikings offense was 22nd, 20.2 points per game, versus a Giants defense that was 26th, allowing 23.9 points per game. The New York Giants, 30th on offense, 15.6 points per game, versus the Minnesota defense, which was actually decent, 14th in the league, 21.3 points per game allowed. The Vikings were 4-4 with Cousins last season, and they were 3-6 without him. Then they let him walk in free agency, selected J.J. McCarthy, who will miss his entire rookie season, and now it's the Sam Darnold show. The Giants were objectively terrible last season, and they lost Saquon in free agency, but hey, they get Daniel Jones back, so there's that. 3 big questions. Number 1, is Brian Daboll on the hot seat? I'm going to go ahead and answer that and say yes. Number 2, what are the Vikings realistically trying to accomplish this season? Number 3, is this the last ride of Daniel Jones? I don't think the Vikings will win many games this year, but they should win this one. Next up, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders traveling to the Los Angeles Chargers. Chargers favored by 3.5 in a game that's projected to go 40.5 points. This LA Chargers offense, mostly without Herbert last year, was 21st in the league, scoring only 20.4 points per game versus a Raiders defense that was stout. 9th in the league, 19.5 points per game allowed. This Las Vegas offense was 23rd in the league, 19.5 points per game, versus a Chargers defense that was 24th in the league, allowing 23.4. The Chargers are attempting to jumpstart a rebuild here, or maybe even avoid one, by bringing in legendary coach Jim Harbaugh and shedding a ton of salary weight tied to aging players, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, including Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen. The Raiders have a tenacious D and a fiery head coach of their own in Antonio Pierce, although they're seemingly leaning on journeyman quarterback and mustache champion Gardner Minshew as a bridge piece to get to where? I don't know, maybe Dak Prescott. But 3 big questions for this matchup. Number one, can Herbert stay healthy? And what is the identity of this Chargers offense going to be? Number two, what are some reasonable expectations for the Raiders this year? Are they just treading water? Number three, can the Chargers really truly avoid an all-out rebuild? And as for my pick, the Raiders defense is not who you want to be facing with a brand new young offense that hasn't had any game experience together, or with a young quarterback who, however astronomically talented he may be, seems to be displaying signs of being injury prone. This Chargers team will be better this year than last year, but here in week one, I've got the Raiders. Moving on to the Broncos at the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks are favored minus 5.5 with an over-under of 42.5. This Seattle offense was 17th in the league last year, 21.4 points per game, versus a really bad Denver defense, 27th last year, allowing 24.3. This Broncos offense was 19th in the league, 21 points per game scored, but that was with Russell Wilson, versus a Seahawks defense that was pretty bad, especially as far as the Seahawks historically go, 25th in the league, 23.6 points per game allowed. My three big questions are, one, what do the Seahawks even look like without Pete Carroll? Number two, where will the blame fall when the Broncos get worse this year without Russell Wilson? And number three, what are the odds that both of these teams end up in their division's respective basements? Next up, we've got the Cowboys traveling to Cleveland to take on the Browns in a game where the Browns are favored by 2.5 and an over-under of 42.5. Cowboys defense was 5th in the league last year, allowing 18.5 points per game, versus a Browns offense that was 10th, 23.3 points per game. Dallas offense was 1st in the entire league, 29.9 points per game scored, versus a Cleveland defense that was 13th, 22.3 points per game allowed. My three big questions. Number one, will the Browns ever get anything out of their massive $250 million investment into Deshaun Watson? Probably not. Number two, could this really be Dak Prescott's last year in a Cowboys uniform? And number three, will either of these teams, who have been fairly dominant in the regular season and underwhelming in the playoffs, improve in the postseason? I'm picking the Browns in this matchup because the Cowboys are a different team on the road. They're just a completely different team and not a particularly good one when they're outside of Frisco. Next up, we've got Washington at Tampa Bay. Buccaneers favored by 2.5 with an over-under of 42.5. This Commanders defense was dead last in the league last season, allowing 30.5 points per game. That's going to change this year with Dan Quinn at the helm, but I don't know by how much. Tampa Bay offense was 20th in the league, scoring 20.5 points per game. Washington's offense was 25th, scoring only 19.4 points per game, versus a Buccaneers defense that was 7th, allowing only 19.1 points per game. Three big questions. One, can Dan Quinn take this Washington defense from last in the league in 23 to the top half or even top 10 in 2024? Number two, can Washington accelerate this rebuild and contend right away? Number three, can the Buccaneers build on 2023 to become more than a dark horse contender in 2024? With a new head coach in Dan Quinn, new quarterback, and a bunch of free agents coming over, particularly on defense, this Washington Red Commander football team is going to be better than they were last season. But I don't think a team in Washington's situation is an overnight kind of project. We'll see. Meanwhile, Tampa Bay has quietly been the best team in football's worst division for a number of years now, and they easily sent the Eagles packing from the playoffs a few months ago. Do you think the football team, do you think the Washington Commanders are better than the Eagles all of a sudden? Washington is going to be better this year, and they'll win some games, but not this one. Next up, Sunday Night Football, LA Rams versus the Detroit Lions, or rather LA Rams at the Detroit Lions. Lions are favored by 3.5, over-under of 51. Matt Stafford makes his second return to Detroit in a game that doesn't mean as much as the playoff matchup 6 months ago, and this is the highest projected point total in week one. The Lions are favored, and probably for good reason. They're at home, they get better every year under Dan Campbell, and they're a legitimate contender. The Rams' offense is going to be absolutely dangerous, but the Rams' defense is going to take a step back this year without Aaron Donald. In fact, this defense was 19th in the league last year, even with Donald, allowing 22.2 points per game, versus a Detroit offense that was 5th in the league, 27.1 points per game scored. This Los Angeles offense was 8th in the league, 23.8 points per game scored, versus a Lions defense that was 23rd, 23.2 points per game allowed. My three big questions are, number one, is this game a 2024 playoff preview and not just a 2023 playoff rematch? How much will LA's defense decline without Aaron Donald? And finally, with more experience and chemistry, can this Lions offense break into the top 3 of the league and gain truly elite status? The numbers seem to indicate this game will be a shootout, and I'm definitely going to be here for it Sunday night. I've got the home team in this one. And finally, last game of the week, we've got the return of Monday Night Football, the New York Jets at San Francisco 49ers. 49ers favored by 3.5 with an over-under of 43.5. The New York Jets defense was 12th in the league, allowing 20.9 points per game, versus a 49ers offense that was 3rd in the entire league, scoring 28.9. New York Jets offense was terrible last season without Rodgers, 29th in the league, 15.8 points per game, versus a San Francisco defense that was also 3rd in the league, allowing only 17.5 points per game. Aaron Rodgers returns from an Achilles injury at age 40 and takes a Nathaniel Hackett offense to the West Coast to face the best team in football. What could possibly go wrong? Three big questions. If the Jets' O-line holds up and keeps Aaron Rodgers on his feet, is New York a real contender for the Super Bowl? Number 2, will the 49ers struggle under the Super Bowl loss hangover as Philly did last year? And number 3, will the lamestream media finally get its cranium removed from its rectum and start giving Brock Purdy even any of the credit that he deserves? I'm going to go ahead and answer that one and say no. As far as the pick, I'm going with the 49ers here at home, even though the Jets will be much better than last year. Go ahead and put your picks in the comments section and check back next week to see how we did. Thank you for watching. If you're still around and you ended up getting anything of value out of the video or having a good time at all, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.